The use of the bias is not something that you can do very easily in mass manufacturing. It requires an understanding of the tensions of the different pattern pieces as they are stitched together. And so it really is best done in a very hands-on way.
I think one of the most interesting aspects of Charles is he's probably the only American designer who is as interested in what his garment looks like on the inside than it is on the outside. If you turn one of his garments inside out, the entire seamage around the garment is hand-over cast.
Turn this inside out, and just really allows you to see a lot of the construction detail on the inside. Just the amount of hand overcasting on all of these seams is just so much work.
So I realized it was going to be up to me. Now that's when it became really back-breaking work.
Charles lived in his workroom. Many years, Charles slept on his cutting table.
I realized that, okay, they're ordering in an 8. I had to stop and think, they're ordering also in a 14. So I had to go back to the dress forms and start redraping from an 8 to a 10, from 10 to a 12, and a 12 to a 14.
When you think that an average small dress, I'm talking about one of his little dresses, what he calls his little dresses, they took about 40 to 80 hours to sew them. He had to go through that process for every size.
That was the real problem. That was where the money angle, really making money on these clothes, became very, very difficult. But what it did do was really give me a chance to work outside with what I had learned now. And so the first people who came along was DuPont.
The innovations of new textiles has always been ongoing, but what one found in the 1960s was this desire to really use technology for artistic purpose. And so you had fabrics with lurex and mylar and spandex.
We have an example of Charles's work that he did with DuPont in developing Kiana as a marketable fabric. DuPont had approached him to try and develop this for the market, and he worked with them in construction techniques and drapeability, trying to find out if it was something that would really work in the marketplace.
Well, it turned out to be one of the best things in the world for me. The money was very, very good, and I found it absolutely fascinating working with these scientists.
His favorite type of Kiana was the Kiana jersey that had a really nice hand and draped very softly. And this cape is one of the pieces that he made out of the Kiana nylon.
DuPont, who was a great advertiser in Vogue and all of this business, they're the ones who went to Vogue magazine and said, you know, you really should hire Charles to go around the country when you're trying to sell fabrics, which at that time a Vogue magazine was trying to sell. They got a wardrobe together, and I would go around the country and talk about the pattern and explain to people that this pattern could not be really custom made for them, so that they needed to take the pattern and perhaps make some adjustments. So I could talk to that kind of business about them, and also help in selling the fabric that Vogue was advertising.
Then he did a couple of years that he worked for American Silk Mills.
And the last one was with the Taubman Company in 1981 and 82, which again, we were all over the country.
He was approached by somebody with an idea, gee, you have these wonderful garments, let's do a show in the malls.
Taubman at that time owned malls all over the country. And so we were doing a fashion show that said then and now. Some of the vintage garments I had was the then, and then they got the current garments from the stores, and then I commentated that.
He became a showman working for Taubman.
There was a good bit of the showmanship in the trends then and now, because I would say to the audience, who out there thinks of Joan Crawford? Well, then the garment, my garments from the older, I was beginning to build this historic collection. That garment would come out on a model. And then at the end of it, I said, and who have you always wanted to be? And I said, well, I've always wanted to be Fred Astaire. And I was in a white tie situation. And I had a hat that collapsed. And so I got out and tried to do a little bit of a step and said, I've always wanted to be Fred Astaire. And so, yeah, it involved a bit of showmanship.
In the 1970s, the retail industry changed. The designers would now bring their whole line and do a fashion show, and then the women would come in, view the trunk show, fashion show, and order from the trunk show. Charles didn't feel like he ever really had enough of a line to be able to do that.
He was really practicing the high level of couture for ready-to-wear dresses. The zippers were all hidden. The stitching was done by hand.
And because the stores weren't ordering large quantities, or the quantities that they had been a decade earlier, then they would only order, 1 or 2 pieces, and it just wasn't enough to keep the business going.
Today, all these businesses are brands, in quotation, whatever on earth that means. And they're merchandised, They have rules and regulations about how much you have to buy and what price you can make it and so on and so forth.
Coco is right. I'm sad also that it's not that way. I don't think the fabrics are that good. It has changed, and it hasn't. But, I say to people, look, the world has to change.
Throughout this process, he also started doing a couple of different couture sewing classes.
That was wonderful to think that maybe I can help some young students here. And in a way that continues today. Kent State University at the school, Elizabeth Rhodes has been a great friend, and we've done week-long seminars up there where she's gotten people from all over the country, usually students, so we developed their design, in other words.
A lot of different universities had him come in as a visiting designer and teach his couture techniques in a week-long workshops.
It was in 1984 that I came to the Ohio State University for 1 quarter. I was brought in as a visiting professor in the Department of Textiles and Clothing. It worked very well. 24 years later, here I am.
I heard from Jenny Stoltz that there was this wonderful new man in Columbus who was going to be at Ohio State and work in the so-called costume collection.
And people say to Charles, well, how do you know Virginia? I mean, why have you become such fast friends? And Charles says, well, I found her in the Yellow Pages. He needed an appraiser to appraise the things that people were donating to the Historic Costume and Textile.
And so I didn't really know anybody. I looked in the Yellow Pages and found out appraisers, and a few people came, and Virginia came looking beautifully dressed, and I thought, well, here's somebody who knows what clothes are all about.
So he hired me on the spot after he called me, and I did a lot of appraisals. We took in a lot of merchandise.
My mother and I decided to do a tea at my mother's home in Bexley, and we invited all sorts of very lovely women, and they came and they met Charles, and soon everyone wanted to help Charles.
There's a way Charles has with people, and how he puts an exhibition together, how he deals with the people putting that exhibition together, that makes one want to help him.
When you listen to Charles talk, you really want to help him because he makes you realize that this is an important thing of history.